Now, there was a question being asked that can we have two return statements over here, or can we have two return types of a method, right? Let's say this method I've written is end. Can we have two return types? As soon as I write two return types, the compiler will gonna throw an error, right? So this thing is not possible. A method can only have one return type, right? And same way, if I write return over here any number over here, integer, right? And if I again type return over here, then again this will be treated as a unreachable code. If you see over here, unreachable code. So there has to be only one return statement over here. You cannot write two return statements, and the method cannot have two return types. All right. And in any case, you want to return more than one value in this method, then that has to be of an array type, but that has to be present inside the single return statement, right? Now, what is an array? We'll be discussing about that in coming lectures. Now, the next thing comes is this particular section, right? Now, what are these? If I go back to this slide, we will discuss about this access modifier. For the timing, we are giving it as public. Then we have seen the return type. We have seen the method name, right? And now comes is the parameter list. So this thing is basically a parameter list. Now, what can we keep inside the parameter list, right? Let's say if I have written int I over here, right? I can write int j over here. Now, same thing, I can actually declare it over here as well, right? Declare in the sense I can write int k, I can write string a, I can write char c, I can write float f, boolean v. So this uh, section can have n number of parameters. It can have n number of parameters, or it cannot have any parameter, right? Now we don't initialize these variables over here. We just declare them over here, right? Means you cannot write any value over here like this, right? It will actually gonna compiler will gonna throw some error over here, right? But yes, you can do the same thing over here, but these things will not gonna call as parameters, right? This will not gonna call as a parameter, but these are the parameters, right? You can only declare them, you cannot define them. You cannot define the parameters over here, right? So it means that whenever you're gonna call this method, you actually need to define the values to these variables, right? And if the variables are actually declared over here, then it's not mandatory that you should actually provide values to them, right? As in, I've created a method called display over here. If I create another method that says show, right, and I keep the same values over here, let's say int a, int b, right, string c, right, all these values over here like this. And if we call this method, now how to call a method? In order to call a method, I'll go over here, I'll just create an object of this class. So I'll say learning methods L equal to new learning methods, right? And I'll say L dot, and the very first method I called is display. See, as soon as I call this method, I actually need to give values to these parameters, right? But if I call the method L dot show, it's not mandatory that I should define values what are there inside this particular method, right? So any parameter that you have given over here, whenever you give a call to this method, it will actually gonna ask to provide the value to these parameters. So this thing that we have seen over here is called as parameter list, right? So parameter list are the variables which are declared inside the declaration of a method like this, and the method parameters can be nothing, one or more than one, right? We can have a method without any parameters, or we can have one or more than one parameters inside a method. And for multiple parameters, they are basically separated by these commas, right? And now the next thing comes is the method body, right? So the body of a method always starts from the opening curly braces and the closing curly braces, right? All statements of a method goes within the pair of curly braces only. So it means that these are mandatory to add. You cannot remove these curly braces. If you remove them, then the compiler will actually gonna throw an error over here, right? So it is mandatory to give the open curly braces and the closed curly braces, and anything that you want to achieve has to be written inside this particular method only. All right. And one thing more, if you're talking about methods, there are times when we actually not gonna write the body to the method. There are times when we actually gonna declare them like this only, right? But this is not the right time to discuss that particular thing, right? That will be coming with the upcoming lectures, right? Why we need this thing as well, right? So, but for the timing, it's important, it's mandatory that in a class we need to have a method with a body, right? This is a body of a method, right? And same way, execution of the method, it either stops with a return statement or the closing curly braces. Now, before we proceed further, we first actually should see how to call a method in a class, right? Now, whenever we are calling a method in a class, right, there is a main method, right? Here, all the execution happens, right? So, I'll just remove all these things. And we know that if we need to call anything from a class, we first need to create a copy of that class, right? So we cannot direct call these methods. We will be creating a copy of that class, and from that copy instance, we'll gonna call the methods from this class. Now, in order to do this, I first need to create an object of this class, right? By saying learning methods learn equal to new learning methods, like this, right? And then I'll use this reference variable. This is basically a reference variable, and this is an object, right? So I'll be using this reference variable, and I'll be will call the dot operator, and we should be able to access all the methods and the data members that are there inside this class, right? So you can see the data members are the variables and the methods, right? And if you want to call any method that you have created inside this class will actually gonna show you as soon as you type, as soon as you call the dot operator, right? You'll see the class name against your method name. So if you want to call the method show, you can directly call this method like. And same way, I can say learn dot and the second method, right? Now basically what I'm doing, I'm not calling the method from this class. I'm actually calling the method from this object, right? So this is basically a copy of this class. As soon as you create an object, it holds all the methods inside this object, and then we can call the method by the reference of this object, right? So this reference is actually holding this object, right? Wherever this object is stored inside the memory, this reference is actually holding this object and actually calling these methods from the object itself. So same way I can create n number of objects. If I create one more object of this class, and that object, let's say I give it a name as learn1, right? So this object will also going to contain the entire copy of the class with all these methods. So same way I can say learn one dot show. I can again call all the methods from this class. Now this will be a separate object that is allocated to a memory. And this show method is actually called by this object, and this show method is called by a different object.